Hello, everyone. I'm the Enforcer, and welcome to the breaking news. Starting off with our first breaking news today, the Prime Minister of the Russian Federation, Dmitry Medvedev, has declared that Ukrainians who are happy or are hoping for the return of the Ukrainian army in Russian occupied areas of Ukraine should be sent to the Gulag for re education. According to the direct quote from Medvedev, he said they should be identified and punished, sent them to Siberia for re education and forced labor camps. Dmitry Medvedev is the second highest person in the Russian Federation. Being the prime minister of Russia, he is literally the only person below the president of Russia, which is Vladimir Putin. The idea that a statement is being said at this high of a level from the prime minister of the Russian Federation to practically conduct crimes against humanity, and this isn't anything that's even quietly being mentioned, it's actually something that's being publicly mentioned, and not only that, probably supported by an official Russian government stance, it is starting to become very concerning what the actual humanitarian outlook will be inside of occupied areas of Ukraine. The situation is already grim, as we know that many Ukrainian citizens have been abused and violated by Russian forces that are currently occupying around a 20% area of the country to the southeast. But nevertheless, this could increase with many Ukrainians being sent into possible concentration camps, for the most part, inside of Siberia. What's fairly interesting about that is that, from what we understand, Alexei Navalny was being held in what we could call a modern Russian gulag inside of the Arctic Circle area, in the very far northern areas of the Russian Federation. But nevertheless, the idea of a gulag is something that usually invokes very concentration camp like vibes. Really, it is the exact same thing as a German concentration camp, it's just that that is the Russian name for a concentration camp, gulag. Gulags were used historically during the times of Stalin and even slightly before that to hold political dissidents and political prisoners and force them into pretty hard manual labor, usually involving their working until their death or until they die from exposure to the elements. Going off of that and knowing that that's exactly what the Russian public knows a gulag to be as well, because due to the fall of the Soviet Union and also de-Stalinization, everyone in the former Soviet Union and everyone in the Russian Federation clearly know what a gulag is and what the gulags really do treat people like animals. And the fact that Medvedev would even mention something like that and entertain the idea shows that there is a very deep-seated cultural hatred of the Ukrainians inside the Russian government, and not only on a strategic level is the war in Ukraine concerning, but on a humanitarian level, it is wildly concerning with statements like that coming out. And it appears that the Russians are attempting to try and take more land as the war continues on. With the end of the Avdiivka offensive, the Russians have immediately moved on to starting a 40,000 strong offensive in the northeast and attempting to retake a large part of the area that Ukraine took in the latter part of 2022, which was during the Balaklia counteroffensive. While going off of this, it appears that the Russians are going off of the same offensive axes that they went off of very early on in the war. We can see that they have a two-pronged offensive made of the 1st Guards Tank Army and the 6th Combined Arms Army trying to head towards the city of Kupiansk and attempt an encirclement. However, we can see something else interesting as well, is that an attempt by the Russian military to conduct an encirclement of Kupiansk, which is really the key lynch point of the northeastern part of the Ukrainian battlefield, is going to be very difficult because they have to cross the Seversky Donets River, and the Ukrainians can probably make that a deadly attempt for the Russians to try and make. Not only that, we can see the 3rd Motorized Rifle Division is also attempting a northwestern sweep towards the area of Nevsky, and once again towards the Seversky Donets area. But once again, we don't really know how well that offensive would pan out. It appears that the terrain that they'll be attempting to cross is mired with somewhat larger lakes that may create choke points for Ukrainian defenders to inflict high casualties on pushing or offending Russian forces. We can also see the 144th Guards Motorized Rifle Division within the Severonsky Forest is also attempting an offensive of its own, trying to once again reclaim the city of Lieman, which is just 10 miles north of the city of Slavyansk, and also trying to move generally towards a direction heading towards Izium. Once again showing that this offensive, as it has started today, is trying to reclaim the lost territory that the Ukrainians were able to take in the latter part of 2022 and have been able to hold since then. We are expecting that this Russian offensive will most likely grind to a halt, as this war has proven, for both sides, that multi-pronged, large-scale offensives like this very rarely succeed at this point in the war, largely due to the massive ability of really both sides to conduct an effective defense, especially over a large front line like we're seeing in the Northeast. So our expectations of this offensive is that it's most likely going to have minimal gains, if any gains at all, and will most likely result in incredibly high casualties. Speaking of incredibly high casualties, it appears that the Russian government has had a massive casualty today in the form of one of the biggest banks in the Russian Federation collapsing. According to the information that we've gotten, the QIWI Bank, one of the largest central banks inside of Russia, has completely collapsed overnight. There really has been no good explanation for this. According to the Central Bank of Russia, they said that the bank was used to make payments for money laundering and terrorist financing, which is a little bit funny because really every Russian bank could kind of fall under that qualification at this point. Nevertheless, it is still a very large bank inside of Russia, and its closure is most likely going to start causing tremors within the already fragile Russian economic scene. It may even lead to larger collapses of other banks that were tied into QIWI. But nevertheless, at the moment, it does appear that the Russian economic situation is certainly becoming worse as time keeps passing, and it will become worse, with Latvia becoming one of the first countries in the European Union and NATO to ban all imports of Russian and Belarusian grain. According to what the Latvian president, Edgars Rinkēvičs, said, he argued that Russian grain imports support the Russian economy and therefore the Russian armed forces inside of Ukraine. For that reason, they will not be importing any Russian grain under any circumstances. There is now a complete ban on the importation, and we can also hear that at the exact same time, they also ban Belarusian grain imports as well. So the Belarusians and Russians largely operate lock and step, and also there is the possibility that the Russians could use Belarus to circumvent the Russian grain ban. So they decided to ban both Belarus and Russia at the exact same time. This is once again starting to show that the European Union is becoming a lot more stringent on what they're allowing to pass through the sanctions. And we can also see that the British Army is working on also making sure that the economic and felt impact inside of Russia is going to be incredibly heavy, as the British government announced a massive wave of brand new sanctions today against the Russian Federation. And not only that, at the exact same time, announced they'll be sending 200 more Brimstone anti-tank missiles for the Ukrainians to use against the Russian military. From what we understand, the Brimstone missiles are wildly effective. They are a modernized and more potent version of a Hellfire missile is the best way to explain it in any kind of relative sense. And back in the earlier parts of the war, the Ukrainians were provided with a decent, substantive amount of Brimstones. The Brimstones ended up being wildly effective, usually knocking out Russian tanks in a single hit, not requiring any kind of a double tap or any other additional attacks like that. They were very good at their job, and being able to send another 200 Brimstones to the Ukrainians shows that the Ukrainians have 200 more Russian tanks that they can pretty much already add to the kill list. It's just a matter of finding these Russian tanks and then firing the Brimstone at them for them to be destroyed. So hopefully we'll get to hear that the British impact on the war continues to grow over these coming months. On top of that, we have finally heard that an official announcement has been made by the government of the Netherlands that the F-16s will, by no means, be arrived later than summer of this year. The F-16s are going to be in Ukraine this year. They have said that there will be no more delays, no more pushbacks. They will, in fact, be completely ready by the summer of this year. Meaning that for the first time ever, Ukraine will have operational F-16s within the Ukrainian Air Force. And at the exact same time, there is a small issue that has been developing along the border with Ukraine and Poland, which can really be considered the very frontier of the European Union as well as the NATO alliance. A large amount of Polish citizens have taken it upon themselves to try and blockade the border crossings in between Ukraine and Poland. And this has started to create some pretty high tensions in between the Polish government and the Ukrainian government as a result. The Ukrainian government last night made a plea through Volodymyr Zelensky directly to the Polish government that they are no enemy and they are a friend, and they consider the relationship in between Poland and Ukraine to be a vital one and one that is wildly important. Today we got to hear a similar statement being made by the Polish government as they said that they will clear out the blockades because Polish-Ukrainian relations are a matter of national security, and not only that, the fate of Ukraine is hanging in the balance, which is not only a matter of Polish national security, but is a matter of Western international security. We can see that the Polish are once again reinvigorating their efforts to make sure that these border crossings are opened and that Ukrainian economic commerce can continue to flow freely, although it may cause short-term or long-term problems for the Polish agricultural industry. They are willing to take that risk to ensure that the strategic abilities of Ukraine are not hindered in any way, shape, or form due to some concerns within the Republic of Poland. Beyond that, however, that is all of the major breaking news that we have today. I've got to thank all of y'all so much once again for watching, and if y'all have made it to the very end of the video, you must have really enjoyed this, and if you did, you can always support us on Patreon. The link is in the description below. It helps us to make these videos possible, and also make sure to subscribe and comment, because it also makes us very happy, and it encourages us greatly to continue to put news out just like this every single day about what's going on in the war. Of course, thank you all so much once again for watching, and I will see you all in the next one.